The wheels of the stagecoach groaned against the rutted trail as it rolled into Hawks Hollow, just as the last light of day bled from the sky. Clara Jean Whitfield pressed her face against the dusty window, watching the ramshackle buildings emerge from the gloom like broken teeth. Her fingers clutched the worn leather of her traveling bag, the same bag that had carried her hopes from Missouri to this forgotten corner of the frontier. The coach lurched to a stop outside what passed for a depot little more than a wooden platform and a crooked sign that read, "Stage Stop." The driver's voice rang out, "Rough as gravel." Hawks Hollow end of the line. Clara gathered her meager belongings, the leather bag, a canvas sewing satchel heavy with needles and thread, and a folded letter that had promised so much. She descended from the coach, her boots touching the packed earth of a town that suddenly seemed smaller and darker than any place she'd imagined. The other passengers dispersed quickly, a merchant heading for the general store, a ranch hand vanishing into the saloon's yellow light. Within moments, Clara stood alone on the platform, the stagecoach already rattling away into the darkness, leaving her with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the distant bark of a dog. She unfolded the letter once more, though she knew its contents by heart. Her cousin Martha's husband had written it 3 months ago, promising work for a skilled seamstress, promising family, promising a new beginning. But as Clara scanned the empty street, no one emerged to greet her. No Martha, no husband, no one at all. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sparse at first, then gathering strength. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and ventured toward the main street. The saloon spilled laughter and lamplight onto the wooden walkway, but she gave it a wide berth. Decent women didn't enter such places, especially not alone, especially not after dark. She tried the boarding house first, a narrow building with peeling paint and crooked shutters. The proprietress, a pinch-faced woman who peered at Clara through the cracked door, shook her head firmly. "No room," she said, though Clara could see empty chairs through the parlor window. "Not for unmarried women traveling alone. Don't run that kind of establishment." The rain came harder now, soaking through Clara's traveling dress, turning the street to mud. She inquired at the hotel, a grand name for a 2-story building that leaned precariously to one side. The clerk, a thin man with suspicious eyes, quoted a price that would consume most of her remaining funds for a single night. "Is there anywhere else?" Clara asked, hating the tremor in her voice. The clerk shrugged. "Might try the church come morning. Pastor's wife sometimes takes in strays." Strays. The word stung more than the rain. Clara trudged back onto the street, her boots squelching in the mud. She had $17 sewn into the lining of her bag, her entire fortune, saved from 2 years of mending and sewing for the wealthy families of independence. It had seemed like enough when she'd boarded the stage, when Martha's letters had painted pictures of prosperity in the cattle towns, of ranchers' wives desperate for skilled seamstresses. But Martha wasn't here, perhaps had never been here at all. The rain drove sideways now, and Clara stumbled along the buildings, searching for any shelter. Behind the livery stable, she found it a narrow overhang where hay bales were stacked against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was dry. She sank onto a bale, her wet skirts clinging to her legs, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was 24 years old, unmarried, alone in a strange town with no connections, no job, and precious little money. The broken engagement to William seemed almost trivial now compared to this, at least in Missouri. She'd had her small room above Mrs. Henderson's shop, had steady work, had the illusion of respectability even after William had announced his engagement to the banker's daughter. Clara pressed her palms against her eyes, but the tears came anyway. They mixed with the rain on her cheeks, hot and bitter. She cried for her foolishness, for believing in letters from strangers, for thinking she could outrun the shame of being discarded. She cried for her mother, dead these 5 years. Who would have warned her against such recklessness? She cried because she was cold and wet and frightened, and because tomorrow seemed impossible to face. The storm raged on, but gradually Clara became aware of another sound, the slow clop of hooves on the muddy street. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. A horse and rider materialized from the rain, moving slowly past the livery stable. The rider sat easy in the saddle despite the weather, broad shoulders hunched against the downpour. As he passed Clara's hiding spot, the horse whinnied softly and sidled. As if sensing her presence, the rider turned in the saddle, and for a moment, Clara caught sight of his profile in the dim light from the stable's strong jaw. Hat pulled low, rain streaming from the brim. He paused, and she held her breath, uncertain whether to call out or remain hidden. The moment stretched between them, the rider perfectly still while the rain drummed on the tin roof above Clara's head. Then, without a word, he touched his heels to the horse's flanks and continued on, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as he'd come. Clara released her breath in a shuddering sob. Even here, even now, she was invisible, just another shadow in a town full of shadows. She pulled her sewing bag closer, feeling the familiar weight of her tools, scissors and needles, thread and thimbles, the instruments of the only trade she knew. Tomorrow she would have to find work. Any work. Tomorrow she would have to swallow her pride and beg at the church, or worse. But tonight, she would allow herself this grief, these tears that no one would see or judge. The rain eventually softened to a drizzle, then stopped altogether. Clara dozed fitfully against the hay bales, starting at every sound: the skitter of rats, the creak of wood, the distant howl of a coyote. When the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky, she was already awake, stiff and cold but alive. She used the last of the rainwater collected in a barrel to wash her face and smooth her hair. Her dress was wrinkled and still damp, but she brushed it as best she could and straightened her collar. If she must face this town, she would do it with what dignity remained to her. As she emerged from behind the livery stable, Clara didn't notice the fresh horse tracks in the mud, or the way they circled back twice during the night, pausing always at the same spot where a rider might observe the overhang without being seen. She didn't know that someone had kept watch through the long hours, making sure no harm came to the woman who wept alone in the darkness. She knew only that the sun was rising on a new day in Hawks Hollow, and somehow she had survived her first night. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was hers. Clara lifted her chin and walked toward the awakening town, her sewing bag clutched firmly in her hand, ready to stitch together whatever future this unforgiving place might offer. The morning light caught the moisture still clinging to the grass, turning it to diamonds. Somewhere, a rooster crowed, and in the distance, smoke began to rise from chimneys as Hawks Hollow stirred to life, unaware that it had gained a new citizen in the night, one who had arrived with tears but would not be defeated by them. The aroma of fresh bread drew Clara like a beacon through the early morning streets. She followed her nose to a small building wedged between the barber shop and the land office, its windows glowing warm against the pale dawn. A painted sign above the door read "Travis Bakery" in careful letters, and through the glass, Clara could see loaves lined up like soldiers on wooden shelves. She hesitated at the door, aware of her disheveled appearance, her still damp dress, but hunger won over pride. She pushed open the door, setting a small bell tinkling. The woman behind the counter looked up from arranging rolls in a basket. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and flour dusting her capable hands. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, took in Clara's condition in one swift glance: the wrinkled dress, the shadows under her eyes, the way she clutched her bags as if they might flee. "Lord have mercy," the woman said, setting down the basket. "You look like something the cat dragged in and the dog wouldn't eat." Clara's cheeks burned. "I'm sorry. The smell of bread, I thought perhaps—" "Sit!" The woman pointed to a stool near the counter. It wasn't a request. "You're the girl who came in on last night's stage. Saw you from my window, standing there in the rain like you'd lost your last friend." "I was supposed to meet someone," Clara began, but her voice cracked on the words. The woman, May Travis, Clara assumed, disappeared into the back room and returned with a thick slice of bread, still warm, spread with butter and honey. She set it before Clara along with a cup of coffee that steamed in the cool morning air. "Eat first, talk later." Clara wanted to protest, to explain that she could pay, but the first bite of bread nearly undid her. It was perfect crusty outside, soft within, the honey sweet against her tongue. She ate slowly, savoring each morsel while May went about her morning tasks, occasionally glancing over with those sharp eyes. When Clara finished, May refilled her coffee cup and leaned against the counter. "Now then, who were you supposed to meet?" "My cousin Martha Brennan. Her husband wrote that they needed a seamstress, that there was plenty of work here." Clara pulled out the letter, now soft from handling. "But I couldn't find them last night, and the boarding house wouldn't—" "Martha Brennan." May's expression softened slightly. "Honey, the Brennans left Hawks Hollow near about 2 months ago. Heard they went further west, maybe California. Man couldn't make a go of it here, too fond of cards and whiskey, not fond enough of honest work." Clara stared at the letter in her hands. 2 months. They'd been gone 2 months, and she'd spent everything to come here. "I see. Men vanish," May said matter-of-factly, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's the truth of it out here. They chase gold or cattle, or just the horizon itself. Leave women and promises behind like old boots." She studied Clara's face. "But you didn't come all this way just to turn back, did you?" "I'm a seamstress," Clara said quietly. "A good one. I thought the letter said there was need for one here." May's laugh was short, but not unkind. "Girl, there's need for everything here except more dust and disappointment. You say you can sew—" Clara nodded, opening her sewing bag to show the neat rolls of thread, the gleaming scissors, the paper of pins. May examined them with the eye of someone who knew quality. "My delivery boy tore his apron yesterday," May said finally. "Caught it on a nail. I was going to mend it myself, but my eyes aren't what they were. Think you could handle it?" "Of course." Clara accepted the apron, a heavy canvas piece with a ragged tear across the front. She selected her needle and thread, and within minutes was creating tiny, perfect stitches that drew the tear closed so neatly it might never have existed. May watched in silence, then nodded slowly. "That's fine work, very fine." She seemed to come to a decision. "I've got a room upstairs. Nothing fancy, used to be where my son stayed before he went off to the railroad camps. You can have it for now. Work off the rent helping me here mornings and taking in whatever sewing comes your way." Clara's hand stilled on the fabric. You don't know me. I could be anyone." "Could be," May shrugged. "But I know quality when I see it, in sewing and in people. Besides, any woman who sits in the rain crying but still shows up at dawn with her head high, that's someone worth taking a chance on." The kindness, unexpected and freely given, nearly undid Clara again. She blinked hard and focused on finishing the last stitches. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret—" "No promises," May interrupted. "Just work. And another thing, you'll take your meals with me. You're too thin by half, and I don't hold with boarders wasting away under my roof." She led Clara upstairs to a small, clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. It was sparse but spotless, with a quilt on the bed that spoke of someone's careful handwork. "My boy's things are long gone," May said from the doorway. "But the bed's good, and the roof doesn't leak. There's water in the pitcher, and the necessaries out back. Rest a bit, clean up, then come down and help me with the noon rush. We'll see about spreading word that there's a seamstress in town." Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. 12 hours ago she'd been weeping in the rain, certain her life was over. Now she had a roof, a bed, the promise of work. It wasn't what she'd planned. Wasn't the family reunion she'd hoped for. But it was something. She poured water into the basin and washed her face properly, then unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a small mirror, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue, the white gloves she'd made for her wedding to William. She stared at them for a long moment, then shoved them back into the bag. Some things were better left buried. By the time she returned downstairs, the bakery was busy with the noon trade. Ranch hands grabbed rolls and coffee. Townswomen selected loaves for their families. Children pressed noses against the glass case where May kept sweet rolls. Clara helped wrap purchases, poured coffee, learned the prices. May moved with practiced efficiency, greeting everyone by name, knowing their preferences without asking. "That's Ben Morrison, owns the hardware store," May murmured between customers. "His wife might need mending done. Woman can't thread a needle to save her soul." And there's Alice Pruitt, the school teacher, strict as they come, but fair. She'd probably appreciate someone who could help with the children's Christmas pageant costumes come winter. Clara nodded, trying to remember names and faces. The townspeople eyed her with curiosity, but not hostility. May's acceptance seemed to grant her a provisional place among them. Late in the afternoon, when the bakery was quiet, May sat down with a cup of tea and studied Clara over the rim. "You never asked what I want in return for the room and board." "I assumed we'd work that out. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Good, because there's plenty of it here. But that's not what I meant." May set down her cup. "I've been alone since my Charlie died 3 years back. My boy writes sometimes from Denver, but a letter's cold comfort on a winter night. I'm not looking for charity cases or sob stories. But if you're willing to work, to build something here instead of just passing through, then we might suit each other fine." "I'm not passing through," Clara said firmly. "I've got nowhere else to go." "That's a start," May said. "Though someday you'll need a better reason to stay than having nowhere else. This land has a way of testing people, sorting out who belongs and who doesn't." As if to underscore her words, the bell above the door chimed. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with early silver at the temples, and Clara recognized him instantly. The rider from last night, the one who'd paused in the rain. "Afternoon, May," he said, his voice low and measured. "The usual, if you've got it." "Always do. Read." May was already wrapping 2 loaves in brown paper. "This is Clara Whitfield, new in town. She's a seamstress. Going to be staying upstairs and helping out. Clara, Reed Calderon, runs cattle out at the Double C." Reed's eyes, blue as winter sky, met Clara's briefly. Something flickered in them. Recognition, perhaps. But he merely nodded. "Miss Whitfield." "Mr. Calderon." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. He paid for his bread and turned to go, then paused. "If you're taking in mending, I've got some coats need attention before winter sets in. Ranch work is hard on clothes." "I'd be happy to look at them." Clara managed. Another nod, and he was gone, the bell chiming his departure. Clara watched through the window as he swung up onto his horse, the same horse from last night, and rode away. "That one's got a story," May said softly. "Lost his wife 2 winters back to fever. Keeps to himself mostly now. Just him and the ranch hands out at the Double C. Good man, though. Quiet, but good." Clara turned from the window, pushing away the memory of that still figure in the rain. She had no business thinking about anyone's story but her own. She was here to work, to survive, to build something from nothing. That was enough. It had to be, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, turning the flour dust to gold. Clara helped May prepare for the next day's baking. She was learning the rhythm of this new life, the pre-dawn rising, the careful measuring, the patience required for bread to rise. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but perhaps that was for the best. Her imagination had led her astray before. Stitches don't lie, May had said that morning, and Clara was beginning to understand what she meant. A stitch was honest work, visible and true. It held things together or it didn't. There was no pretense in it, no false promises, just thread and fabric and the skill in one's hands. Tomorrow she would begin taking in mending. Tomorrow she would start building a reputation, a life, stitch by careful stitch. And maybe, eventually, Hawks Hollow would become more than just the place where she'd washed up like driftwood after a storm. For now, though, it was enough to have flour under her nails and bread in her belly, a bed waiting upstairs and work for her hands. It was enough to be Clara Whitfield, seamstress, resident of Hawks Hollow, instead of Clara Whitfield, abandoned woman with nowhere to go. The sun was setting by the time they finished cleaning up. May showed her how to bank the ovens for the night, how to set the starter for tomorrow's bread. These were new skills, but Clara's hands had always been quick to learn. As she climbed the stairs to her room that night, Clara thought about the rider in the rain, about kindness given without expectation, about the strange turnings that had brought her here. Her first night in Hawks Hollow had passed with tears, but this second night, she thought, might pass with something closer to hope. A week passed before Clara ventured to Murphy's general store. She'd needed thread and fabric to start taking in proper mending work, and May had assured her that Patrick Murphy offered fair prices and good quality. The store sat at the corner of Main and 2nd, its wide windows displaying everything from bolts of calico to farming implements. Clara smoothed her second-best dress, a practical brown wool that had seen better days, but was clean and pressed, and stepped inside. The store smelled of leather and coffee beans, tobacco and new cloth. She moved toward the fabric section, running her fingers along the bolts, checking quality and weight. Well, the mysterious seamstress. Clara turned to find a large man in a deputy's star watching her. He stood too close. Close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair and the whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. Deputy Wade Conroy. She presumed from May's descriptions a man who liked his authority a little too much. "I'm hardly mysterious, Deputy," Clara said, stepping back to put a proper distance between them. "Just new to town." Wade Conroy. He didn't offer his hand, which was a relief. Instead, his eyes traveled slowly from her face to her feet and back again. "Heard you were staying with May Travis. Also heard you came in on the night stage alone. No husband, no family. Is there a law against that?" Clara kept her voice level, though her hands wanted to clench. "No law." Conroy smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just unusual. Woman like you, traveling alone, makes folks wonder what you're running from, or toward." "I'm running toward honest work, Deputy. Nothing more." "That's so." He moved closer again, backing her against the fabric display. "Seems to me a woman with your posture and presence might have other talents besides sewing." Clara felt her cheeks burn. She knew what he was implying, had heard such suggestions before from men who thought an unmarried woman alone must be available for the taking. "I'll thank you to keep your opinions to yourself, Deputy Conroy." Now, no need to get uppity. I'm just being friendly, trying to make you feel welcome." "That's enough." The voice came from behind Conroy, quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. The deputy turned, and Clara saw Reed Calderon standing in the doorway, hat in hand, expression calm but eyes hard as flint. "Don't recall asking your opinion, Calderon," Conroy said, but he took a step back from Clara. "Don't recall offering one." Reed moved into the store with that same easy grace she'd noticed before. "Just stating a fact. The lady said she's here for thread. Seems like you're keeping her from her business." Conroy's face reddened. "Since when do you care about anybody's business but your own?" "Since right about now." Reed's tone remained conversational, but something in his stance had shifted, subtle as a horse gathering itself before a jump. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Clara held her breath, aware that she'd become the center of some larger conflict she didn't understand. Finally, Conroy snorted. "Not worth my time anyway," he muttered, shouldering past Reed toward the door. "Watch yourself, Miss Whitfield. This town has expectations for proper behavior." After he left, Clara found herself shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady her hands. "You all right?" Reed's voice was gentle now, the hard edge gone. "Yes, thank you. I could have handled it myself, but—" "I know you could have." He studied her face, those blue eyes seeing more than she liked. "But sometimes it helps to have backup. Conroy's mostly hot air, but he can make trouble when he's minded to." "Why did you help me?" Reed was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "Didn't like the odds. Never have." He glanced at the fabric display. "Getting supplies. Thread, and maybe some muslin for patterns." Clara forced herself to focus on practical matters. "You mentioned coats needing mending." "3 of them. Been meaning to bring them by." He paused. "Could drop them at May's this afternoon if that suits." "That would be fine." He nodded and turned to go, then looked back. "Miss Whitfield, don't let Conroy run you off. Town needs good people more than it needs another deputy with too much time on his hands." After he left, Clara finished her purchases quickly, aware of Patrick Murphy watching her with curious eyes from behind the counter. She could feel the weight of whispers building already the new woman. The scene with the deputy, Reed Calderon's intervention, in a town this small. She'd just become the morning's entertainment. Walking back to the bakery, Clara kept her head high despite the stares. 2 women outside the millinery shop stopped talking as she passed. A group of men at the livery stable watched her with speculative eyes. Even the children playing in the street paused their game to gape. "Heard you met our illustrious deputy?" May said when Clara entered the bakery. News traveled fast in Hawks Hollow. "He's a charming fellow," Clara said dryly, setting her purchases on the counter. May snorted. "Charming as a rattlesnake and twice as poisonous. Good thing Reed was there." "I could have managed." "Course you could. But out here, knowing when to accept help is just as important as being able to stand on your own." May studied her shrewdly. "Conroy won't forget being backed down. He's got a mean streak and a long memory." What did Mr. Calderon mean about the town having expectations? May's expression darkened. "Same expectations every small town has. Women should be married or working toward it. Should be quiet, proper, invisible unless needed. Should know their place and keep to it." She slammed a ball of dough onto the floured board. "Been fighting those expectations my whole life. You planning to do the same?" Clara thought about William, about the life she'd thought she'd have wife to a prosperous merchant, mother to his children, respectable and safe and slowly suffocating. "I just want to work, to build something of my own." "Then you'll be fighting whether you plan to or not." May attacked the dough with renewed vigor. "But you've got spine. Saw that the first morning. You'll do fine." That afternoon, Reed appeared with 3 heavy coats draped over his arm. Clara examined them. Professionally good quality wool, but showing hard wear. Split seams, torn pockets, missing buttons. "Ranch work," Reed said simply. "Hard on gear." "I can see that." Clara fingered a particularly nasty tear. "This looks like barbed wire." Good eye, that's exactly what it was. She quoted a fair price for the work, and he nodded without haggling. As she wrote up the order, she was aware of him watching her, not with Conroy's leering assessment, but with something quieter, more thoughtful. "I'll have them ready by week's end," she promised. "No rush. Weather's still holding fair." He hesitated at the door. "Miss Whitfield, about this morning." "Thank you," Clara interrupted, "for stepping in, even if I could have managed alone." A slight smile touched his mouth, transforming his weathered features. "Never doubted it, but Conroy's like a dog with a bone. Better he chews on me than you." After he left, Clara carried the coats upstairs and spread them on her bed. The work would be challenging but satisfying honest labor that would show her skill. As she selected thread to match the fabric, she found herself thinking about Reed's smile, the way it had softened his whole face. Dangerous thinking. That she'd come to Hawks Hollow to work, not to moon over taciturn ranchers with sad eyes, but as she began the first careful stitches, Clara couldn't quite banish the memory of his voice saying her name, or the way he'd stood between her and trouble without hesitation. The news of the confrontation spread through town like wildfire. Over the next few days, Clara noticed a shift in how people looked at her. Some, with increased speculation, what kind of woman drew the attention of both the deputy and the reclusive Reed Calderon, others with a grudging respect she'd stood up to Conroy. And that took courage. The schoolteacher, Alice Pruitt, brought 2 dresses for hemming and stayed to chat about the Christmas pageant costumes. Ben Morrison's wife appeared with an armload of shirts. Even the minister's wife stopped by with some delicate lacework that needed repair. "Seems you're becoming established," May observed one evening as Clara worked by lamplight, her needle flying through fabric. "It's a start." Clara held up the completed coat, examining her work critically. The repair was nearly invisible. The torn pocket replaced entirely. "Good honest work." "That it is." May was quiet for a moment. "Reed asked after you today. Wanted to know if you were settling in all right." Clara kept her eyes on her work. "That was kind of him. Reed Calderon doesn't do things out of kindness. He does them because they're right." May stood, stretching her back. "His wife, Sarah, was a friend of mine. Sweet girl, always laughing. When she died, something in Reed just shut down. Haven't seen him take interest in much beyond his ranch since then. I'm sure he's just being neighborly." May's laugh was knowing. "If you say so, girl. But I've got eyes. And so does the rest of this town." As if to prove her point. The gossip reached new heights the next day. Clara overheard 2 women at the general store discussing whether she'd set her cap for Reed or if she was playing a deeper game. The men at the saloon apparently had a bet going about how long she'd last in town. And Conroy, according to May's sources, was telling anyone who'd listen that Clara was nothing but trouble in a pretty package. "Let them talk," Clara said firmly when May reported the latest whispers. "I've got work to do." And she did. Orders came steadily, now mending. Alterations, even a new dress for the banker's daughter. Clara's fingers were kept busy, and her small savings began to grow. She helped May with the morning baking, learning the rhythm of the work, the way bread could tell you when it was ready by feel alone. But at night, when she lay in her narrow bed listening to the distant sounds of the saloon and the closer chirping of crickets, Clara sometimes let herself remember those moments in the general store, Conroy's ugly insinuations, her own fear, and then Reed's quiet voice cutting through it all like a clean blade. She was building something here, stitch by stitch, day by day, a reputation, a life, maybe even a home. But she was also beginning to understand that in a town like Hawks Hollow, no one built alone. Like it or not, she was part of the fabric now, her thread woven in with all the others. And somewhere in that weaving was a dark thread named Wade Conroy, and another, stronger one the color of winter sky, belonging to a quiet rancher who'd chosen to stand between her and trouble. Clara pushed the thoughts aside and picked up her needle again. Tomorrow there would be more work, more whispers, more challenges. But tonight, she had coats to mend and a future to stitch together, one careful seam at a time. Reed Calderon came for his coats on a Thursday evening just as the sun was painting the sky crimson and gold. Clara had finished the last button that afternoon, and the 3 garments hung ready, transformed from their tattered state into respectability. "Evening, Miss Whitfield." He removed his hat at the bakery door, a gesture that seemed automatic yet carried a certain formality. "Hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. Your coats are ready." Clara retrieved them from behind the counter. laying each out for his inspection. I replaced the torn pocket entirely on the brown one. The damage was too extensive to mend properly. The others just needed reinforcement and some creative stitching. Reed examined her work with the careful attention of a man who understood craftsmanship. His fingers traced the nearly invisible repairs, the sturdy new seams. "This is fine work, better than new, I'd say." "Thank you." Clara wrapped the coats in brown paper, tying them with string. "That'll be $3.50. He paid without hesitation, then paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I've got more work, if you're interested. Shirts, mostly. Ranch hands are rough on clothes, and my foreman's wife used to handle it, but she's been poorly. I'd be happy to help. You can bring them by any time." "Actually," he shifted his weight, suddenly looking younger, less certain. "Might be easier if you came out to the ranch. There's quite a bit, and some of it's too worn to make the trip to town. I'd pay extra for your time, of course." Clara hesitated. Visiting a ranch alone, even for business, would set tongues wagging, but she needed the work, and Reed had never given her reason to distrust him. "When were you thinking?" "Saturday morning I could send a wagon." "That's not necessary. I can hire a buggy from the livery." "The road's rough in places. Better to send my man, Tom. He's trustworthy, been with me since before." He stopped, jaw tightening slightly. Since before his wife died. Clara understood. She nodded. "Saturday morning. Then," after he left, May emerged from the kitchen where Clara suspected she'd been listening. "You sure about this, girl?" "It's just business. Mending clothes." May's tone was skeptical. "Reed Calderon hasn't invited anyone to the Double C since Sarah passed. Not even for business. Then perhaps it's time he did." Saturday dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of blue sky that made the vast Texas landscape seem endless. Tom arrived promptly at 8, a grizzled older man with kind eyes and hands scarred from decades of rope work. "Morning, miss," he said, helping her into the wagon. "Boss says to tell you we'll have you back by afternoon." The ride to the Double C took them through countryside that shifted from the scrubby outskirts of town to rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and oak. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Clara glimpsed riders moving among them like ships on a tawny sea. "Been with Mr. Calderon long?" she asked Tom. "Near about 15 years. Came on when he was just starting out. Him and Miss Sarah with nothing but dreams and grit." Tom's weathered face softened. "She was something. Miss Sarah could ride better than most men and had a laugh that'd light up a room. Hit him hard when the fever took her." May mentioned she was well loved. "That she was. Boss ain't been the same since. Keeps to himself mostly. Works sunrise to sundown." Tom glanced at her sideways. "First time he's asked anyone out to the ranch since then. Got the boys all curious." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm just here to mend clothes. Tom." "Course you are, miss! Course you are!" The Double C ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, a solid 2-story structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was well maintained, but had an air of emptiness about it, as if it were holding its breath. Reed met them at the porch steps, dressed in work clothes but clean-shaven, his hair still damp from washing. "Miss Whitfield, thank you for coming." He helped her down from the wagon, his hand warm and calloused against hers. For a moment they stood close enough that she could smell soap and leather and something uniquely him-cedar, perhaps, or sage. "You have a beautiful place," Clara said, stepping back to a proper distance. "Sarah designed the house." His voice carried a quiet pride tinged with loss. "Said if we were going to build a life out here, we'd do it right." He led her through the front door into a parlor that showed a woman's touch despite 2 years of neglect. Curtains hung at the windows, faded but clean. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace with a basket beside it, as if someone had just set down their needlework. "The clothes are in here," Reed said, guiding her to a side room that might once have been a sewing room. Piles of shirts, trousers, and work clothes covered every surface. "I'm afraid we let it accumulate." Clara surveyed the mountain of mending with professional interest. "This is several weeks' work, Mr. Calderon." "I know. That's why I thought, if you could sort through it, take what's salvageable. I'll pay for your time today plus the mending work." He paused. "Would you like coffee? Something to eat?" "Coffee would be welcome. Thank you." He disappeared, leaving Clara to examine the clothes. Many were beyond saving, but others just needed basic repairs: split seams, missing buttons, torn cuffs. She began sorting them into piles, mentally calculating time and materials. Reed returned with a tray bearing not just coffee but fresh biscuits, butter, and honey. "Tom's wife sent these over. Said I couldn't have a lady visit without offering proper refreshment." They sat in the kitchen, a large, airy room with windows overlooking the range. Clara sipped her coffee, strong and black, while Reed seemed to search for words. "I should explain," he said finally, "about asking you here. It wasn't... that is, I didn't mean to compromise your reputation." "I'm not worried about my reputation, Mr. Calderon. I'm worried about earning a living." Still, he stared into his cup. This town talks, always has, and a woman alone has to be more careful than most. "I've noticed." Clara set down her cup. "Deputy Conroy made that quite clear." Reed's jaw tightened. "Conroy's a problem looking for a place to happen. Has been since the town council pinned a badge on him. Why does he have such authority if everyone knows he's troublesome? His brother-in-law is the mayor. His cousin runs the bank. Out here, family connections matter more than character sometimes." Reed looked at her directly. "He's been telling stories about you, about that morning at the store." "What kind of stories?" "The kind that aren't worth repeating. Just know that not everyone believes them, and those who matter know better." Clara felt a familiar anger rise, the same feeling she'd had when William's friends had whispered about why he'd broken their engagement. "Let me guess. I'm either a fortune hunter or a woman of loose morals. Or perhaps both." "Clara." Her name on his lips startled them both. He cleared his throat. "Miss Whitfield, you don't have to explain anything to anyone. The people worth knowing will judge you by your work, not by whispers." "Is that what you do, judge me by my work?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I judge you by how you held your head up that first morning, walking through town after sleeping in a barn. By how you faced down Conroy without backing away. By those tiny, perfect stitches that make torn things whole again." The words hung between them, more intimate than any flowery compliment. Clara found herself studying his face, the fine lines around his eyes, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the careful way he held himself, as if he were keeping something fragile from breaking. "We should look at the rest of the clothes," she said softly. They worked in companionable silence after that. Reed helped her sort through the garments, occasionally sharing stories about how particular tears had happened a run-in with a stubborn bull, a tangle with barbed wire, a fall from a green horse. His dry humor surprised her, as did his knowledge of fabric and construction. "Sarah taught me." He explained when she commented. "Said if I was going to ask men to work themselves ragged, least I could do was understand what it did to their gear." By noon, Clara had a good sense of what needed doing. She selected what she could reasonably transport back to town, promising to return for more as she finished each batch. "This is too much work for one person," Reed said as they loaded the wagon. "Maybe you should take on help." "Maybe someday. For now, I can manage." "You say that a lot?" "I can manage." "Because it's true." "I don't doubt it, but managing and thriving are different things." He handed her up into the wagon, then surprised her by climbing up beside her. "I'll ride back with you. Need to pick up supplies anyway." The ride back to town was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, this taciturn man who'd lost his laughing wife and buried himself in work. He caught her looking once and smiled, that same transformative expression she'd seen before. "What?" he asked. "You're different than I expected." "How so?" Clara considered. "May said you'd shut down after your wife died, but you don't seem shut down, just careful." "Careful?" He tested the word. "Maybe that's right. When you lose something precious, you learn to hold the rest at arm's length." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The simple honesty of it made her throat tight. "But it's safer." They reached town as the afternoon sun slanted long across Main Street. Reed helped her carry the clothes up to her room, then stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Thank you for coming today, for taking on all this work. Thank you for trusting me with it." Clara hesitated, then added, "And for the conversation. It's been a while since I talked to someone who didn't ask questions I couldn't answer." "Everyone has questions they can't answer." He settled his hat on his head. "Saturday next for the next batch. I'll be ready." After he left, Clara stood at her window watching him load supplies at the general store. Several townspeople stopped to talk with him, and she noticed how their eyes drifted up to her window. By tomorrow, everyone would know she'd spent the morning at the Double C. Let them talk, she thought. She had work to do, honest work that would pay well and establish her skills. If Reed Calderon wanted to hire her for mending, that was business. The fact that his presence made her feel both safer and more uncertain than she'd felt in years, well, that was nobody's business but her own. She turned from the window and picked up the first shirt. Examining the tear along the sleeve, it would need careful patching, patient stitches to make it strong again. Not unlike herself, perhaps torn but not beyond repair, just needing the right hands to make her whole. As her needle began its familiar dance through fabric, Clara allowed herself a small smile. She'd come to Hawks Hollow with nothing but tears and desperation. Now she had work, a friend in May, and perhaps, though she hardly dared think it, the beginning of something more in the careful kindness of a grieving rancher who understood what it meant to rebuild after loss. Word of Clara's skills spread through Hawks Hollow like ripples on still water. Within 2 weeks of her visit to the Double C, she had more work than she could handle alone. Children brought torn school clothes, their mothers following with baskets of mending. Ranch hands appeared at May's back door, sheepishly holding ripped shirts and worn trousers. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," May observed one evening, watching Clara squint over a delicate piece of embroidery by lamplight. "When's the last time you took a breath that didn't smell of thread?" "Sunday," Clara replied without looking up. "I took a walk after church." "A walk to deliver the Morrisons' mending doesn't count." Clara smiled, but kept working. The truth was, she didn't want to stop. Every completed piece meant coins in her savings jar, meant roots growing deeper into Hawks Hollow's soil. But more than that, the work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, kept her from dwelling on things better left unexamined. Things like the way Reed Calderon had begun stopping by the bakery every few days, always with legitimate business, picking up bread, dropping off mending, inquiring about fabrics for new work shirts for his hands. He never stayed long, but his visits had become something Clara found herself anticipating. "Your stitching's like poetry, Mrs. Abigail Harrison declared one afternoon, examining the delicate repair Clara had made to her best tablecloth. "I swear you can't even see where it was torn." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. It's all about matching the thread weight and following the weave." "Well, it's a gift." The banker's wife, a formidable woman who effectively ruled Hawks Hollow's social scene, studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "I'm hosting a quilting bee next month. We make blankets for the church's charity drive. You should join us." Clara hesitated. Quilting bees were more than just sewing circles. They were where the town's women gathered to share news, form alliances, and occasionally destroy reputations over tea and stitches. "That's kind of you." "Nonsense. It's not kindness. It's practicality. We need skilled hands. and you need to be part of this community proper. Hiding away in May's back room won't do forever." After Mrs. Harrison left, Clara found her hands trembling slightly. An invitation to Abigail Harrison's quilting bee was a formal acknowledgement that she was no longer just passing through, no longer just the strange woman who'd arrived on the night stage. It was acceptance, conditional perhaps, but real. "You'll go, of course," May said when Clara told her. "Abigail Harrison doesn't issue invitations twice. I don't know if I'm ready for that level of scrutiny." "Girl, you've been under scrutiny since the night you arrived. Might as well face it head on with needle and thread in hand." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was sorting through a pile of work clothes when young Timothy Patterson burst through the bakery door, eyes wide with excitement. "Miss Clara, you gotta come quick. There's been an accident at the schoolhouse." Clara's heart lurched. "What kind of accident? Is someone hurt?" "It's the curtains. Miss, they caught on something and tore clean down the middle. And Miss Pruitt's beside herself 'cause the school board's coming to visit tomorrow." Relief flooded through Clara. Torn curtains she could handle. "Tell Miss Pruitt I'll be right there." She grabbed her sewing basket and followed Timothy through town to the small schoolhouse. Alice Pruitt stood before the window, staring at the damaged curtains with an expression of despair. The heavy fabric had indeed torn badly, a ragged gash from top to bottom. "Oh, Clara, thank goodness." The normally composed schoolteacher looked near tears. "The school board is conducting their annual inspection tomorrow, and they're already looking for reasons to reduce our funding." Clara examined the damage. "I can fix this, but it'll take some doing. The fabric's old and fragile. I'll need to reinforce the entire seam." "Whatever it takes. These curtains were donated by the Ladies' Auxiliary 5 years ago. If they see them in ruins—" Alice pressed a hand to her forehead. "Well, it won't just reflect poorly on me, but on the entire women's committee." Clara spent the rest of the morning at the schoolhouse, carefully stitching the curtains back together. The children were supposed to be studying, but she caught many of them watching her work with fascination. When she finished, the repair was visible but neat, the curtains functional if not perfect. "It's wonderful," Alice said with relief. "You can barely notice if you're not looking for it." "I could make new curtains," Clara offered. "If the committee approves the expense. These have seen better days." "I'll propose it at the next meeting." Alice hesitated, then added quietly, "Clara, may I speak frankly?" "Of course." "There's talk about you and Mr. Calderon, about your visits to the ranch." Clara's spine stiffened. "I go there for work, nothing more." "I'm not judging. Lord knows I'm the last person to judge anyone's choices." Alice glanced at her students, then lowered her voice further. "But Deputy Conroy has been particularly vocal. He's suggesting that your relationship with Reed is inappropriate." "Deputy Conroy's suggestions say more about him than about me." "I agree, but his words carry weight with certain people. Just be careful. This town can be cruel to women who don't fit their narrow definitions of propriety." Clara thought about Alice's warning as she walked back to the bakery. She'd noticed the looks, heard the whispers, but had chosen to ignore them. Now she wondered if that was naive. Her contemplation was interrupted by a commotion near the general store. A crowd had gathered, and Clara could hear raised voices. She quickened her pace, then stopped short when she saw what was happening. Reed Calderon stood facing Wade Conroy, both men tense as drawn bowstrings. Between them, scattered in the dust, were what looked like Clara's carefully mended shirts, the batch she'd delivered to Reed just yesterday. "Seems mighty curious," Conroy was saying loudly, playing to the crowd. "Man spends 2 years avoiding town, then suddenly he's here every other day. Must be some powerful attraction." "My business in town is my own," Reed replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, we all know what your business is." Conroy grinned, ugly and knowing. "Question is, What's she charging for services rendered, and which services exactly? The crowd murmured. Some shocked, others eager for drama. Clara felt rage flood through her, hot and cleansing. Without thinking, she pushed through the onlookers. "Those are my repairs scattered in the dirt, Deputy Conroy." Her voice rang clear across the square. 6 shirts, mended and pressed, representing hours of honest work. Are you suggesting there's something improper about a seamstress plying her trade? Conroy's grin widened. Well now, speak of the devil. Just discussing your needlework. With Calderon here. My needlework is exemplary, as anyone who's hired me can attest. Clara bent to gather the shirts, shaking dust from each one, including Mrs. Harrison, Mrs. Morrison, and half the ladies' auxiliary. Are you questioning their judgment as well? Now, don't get all riled. I am not riled, Deputy. I am professionally offended. She stood, clutching the shirts, and faced him directly. You've damaged goods that I spent hours repairing. I could file a complaint for destruction of property. Conroy's face darkened. You threatening me, woman? I'm informing you of your legal liability. Clara turned to Reed, who was watching her with something like awe. Mr. Calderon, I apologize for the condition of your property. I'll clean and press these again at no charge. That's not necessary. It is. She looked back at Conroy. Professional standards must be maintained, even when others lack any standards at all. The crowd stirred, and Clara heard a few chuckles. Conroy's hand moved toward his gun belt not to draw, but in the reflexive gesture of a man used to intimidation. Reed stepped forward then, placing himself between Clara and the deputy. You've made your point, Conroy, such as it was. Now move along. This ain't over, Calderon. No, I don't expect it is. Reed's voice carried a weight that made several onlookers step back. But it's over for today. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Conroy spat in the dust near Reed's boots and stalked away, shouldering roughly through the crowd. Clara found herself shaking as the onlookers dispersed, whispering among themselves. She still clutched the dirty shirts, her knuckles white. Let me take those, Reed said gently. They're ruined. All that work. They're just shirts. His hand covered hers briefly as he took the garments. Are you all right? I'm fine. I couldn't let him say those things. Not about my work. Not just about your work, Reed corrected quietly. About you. About us. The word us hung between them, loaded with implications. Clara met his eyes, seeing concern there, and something else, admiration, perhaps, or recognition. There is no us for him to slander, she said carefully. No, Reed agreed. There isn't, but the way he said it, with a note of regret, made her heart skip. Walk with me. She shouldn't. The scene had already provided enough gossip for a week, but Clara found herself nodding. They walked slowly toward the bakery, Reed carrying the soiled shirts. Clara aware of every eye following their progress. I should stay away, Reed said finally. Coming to town so often, bringing you work, I'm making things harder for you. Don't you dare. The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. I won't let Wade Conroy or anyone else dictate who I work for or speak with, even if it damages your reputation. My reputation is built on my work, not on whispers. Clara stopped walking, forcing him to face her. Unless you'd prefer to take your mending elsewhere, I'd understand. No. The word came quick and firm. No, I don't want that. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Clara, Miss Whitfield, you should know that I— Read Miss Whitfield, Tom's voice interrupted as the old ranch hand hurried toward them. Boss, we got trouble. That new bull broke through the north fence. Half the hands are out trying to round him up. Reed's expression shifted immediately to business. Anyone hurt? Not yet, but Jimmy got tossed pretty good. They need you out there. Reed looked at Clara apologetically. I have to go. Of course. The shirts can wait. He handed them to her, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. What I was trying to say, we'll talk later. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him stride away with Tom, purpose in every movement, and wondered what words had gone unspoken. Well, May said from the bakery doorway where she'd apparently been watching. That was quite a show. Which part? Clara asked wearily. All of it. You facing down Conroy. Reed ready to fight for your honor. The two of you making calf eyes at each other in the middle of Main Street. We were not making calf eyes. Child, I may be old, but I'm not blind. May's expression grew serious. You did good today, standing up for yourself, but you've made an enemy of Conroy now, and that's dangerous. He was already my enemy. Maybe so, but now he knows you're not afraid of him. That makes you a threat. May studied her shrewdly. Question is, what happens next? Clara looked down at the dirty shirts in her arms, thinking of careful stitches undone by carelessness and spite. Then she thought of Reed's eyes, the warmth in them when he'd said her name, the promise of words yet to be spoken. What happens next, she said firmly, is I wash these shirts and mend them again. Better than before. That's what I do. May, I take broken things and make them whole. Even if the breaking never stops. Clara met her friend's worried gaze steadily. Even then, especially then, as she climbed the stairs to her room. Clara realized the truth of her words. She'd been broken when she arrived in Hawks Hollow by betrayal, by loss, by the weight of others' expectations. But with each stitch, each day, each small victory, she was mending herself, creating something new from the pieces of what had been. And if Reed Calderon wanted to be part of that creation, if his presence made the work lighter and the days brighter, well, that was nobody's business but their own. The storm rolled in from the west 3 days later, turning the sky the color of an old bruise. Clara watched from the bakery window as townspeople hurried to secure loose shutters and bring in laundry from the lines. The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing down Main Street. Going to be a bad one, May predicted, testing the window latches. Feel it in my bones. You best get home before it hits proper. I need to finish this coat for Mr. Garrett. He's leaving on tomorrow's stage. Coat won't do him any good if you get caught in this weather. May studied the darkening sky. Though I don't like the thought of you alone upstairs with a storm like this coming. Clara was about to assure her she'd be fine when the bell above the door chimed. Reed entered, bringing with him the smell of rain and urgency. Ladies, he touched his hat brim. May, I've got those supplies you ordered from Millerton. Tom's unloading them now. His eyes found Clara. Miss Whitfield, I was hoping to speak with you about a commission. Of course. Clara set aside her sewing, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. I need a coat made. Winter's coming on and... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I thought perhaps you could take measurements, if you have time. May snorted. In this weather, you'll be lucky to make it home as it is. As if to underscore her words, the first fat raindrops began hitting the windows. Within moments, the drops became a deluge. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that rattled the windows. Well, Reed said mildly, seems I mistimed this. Seems you did. May bustled toward the kitchen. No one's going anywhere in this. I'll put coffee on. Clara found herself alone with Reed, the storm creating a strange intimacy as rain lashed against the windows. He stood by the door, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. You could have sent word about the coat, Clara said softly. Tom, or one of your hands. I could have. He met her eyes. But then I wouldn't have had an excuse to see you. The honesty of it made her breath catch. Before she could respond, May called from the kitchen. "Clara, bring the lamp. Power's likely to go." The next hour passed in the warm circle of the kitchen, the three of them sitting around May's scarred wooden table while the storm raged outside. May told stories of other storms, worse ones, painting pictures of the early days when Hawks Hollow was just a handful of buildings defying the wilderness. "Course, that was before we got civilized," May said with a meaningful look at Reed. "Before we had proper lawmen and such." Reed's jaw tightened slightly. "Conroy's been talking. I take it." "Conroy's always talking. Question is whether anyone with sense is listening." May stood to check the coffee pot. "Though he's been especially vocal since Clara put him in his place the other day." "I heard about that." Reed glanced at Clara, a small smile playing at his lips. "Tom said you were magnificent. Used some other words too, but I won't repeat those in mixed company." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was angry. He had no right to damage your property or suggest—" "What he suggested." "No, he didn't." Reed's voice carried an edge. "But I should have handled it. Not left you to defend." "My own honor, my own work," Clara interrupted. "I'm perfectly capable of both, Mr. Calderon." "I know you are. That's not—" He stopped, frustrated. "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection. I need respect." May coughed delicately. "I'll just go check the bread for tomorrow. You two sort this out." After she left, Clara and Reed sat in silence, broken only by the storm's fury. Finally, Reed spoke. "You're right. I apologize." Clara looked up, surprised. In her experience, men rarely apologized, especially about matters of female independence. "I'm not used to." Reed gestured vaguely. "Sarah was different. She wanted protecting, enjoyed it even, made me feel useful." He smiled sadly. "You're nothing like her." "I'm sorry," Clara said automatically. "Don't be. It's not a criticism, just an observation." He leaned back in his chair. "You remind me more of this country, beautiful and strong and likely to survive long after the rest of us are dust." The words hung between them, too intimate for the setting. Clara found herself studying his hands, scarred and capable, resting on the table like they belonged there. "Tell me about your coat," she said, retreating to safer ground. "What kind were you thinking?" They spent the next while discussing practical matters: wool weight, length, lining options. Clara took rough measurements with the tape she always carried, trying not to notice the solid warmth of him, the way he held himself still under her professional touch. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew worse. The windows rattled in their frames, and somewhere in the distance, Clara heard the crash of something giving way. "That'll be the Johnsons' chicken coop," May announced. "Returning. Never did build it proper." She looked between them. "Reed, you'd best stay the night. Can't have you riding home in this." "I'll be fine." "You'll be dead is what you'll be. Lightning's hitting regular now, and that horse of yours has more sense than to carry you through it." May's tone brooked no argument. "Clara, you got extra blankets upstairs." "I can stay down here," Reed protested. "On what, the floor? Don't be daft." May turned to Clara. "You can bunk with me tonight. Let him have your room. It's settled." Clara wanted to protest the impropriety of it. What people would say, but another crack of thunder decided her. May was right. Sending Reed out in this would be tantamount to murder. She climbed the stairs to gather her night things, intensely aware of Reed following to see the room. It looked smaller with him in it, more personal. She saw him notice the careful way she'd arranged her few possessions, the sewing laid out on the small table, the Bible on the nightstand. "It's not much," she said, gathering her nightdress and trying not to blush. "It's perfect." He stood by the window, watching the storm. "Clara, what I said earlier about protecting you, it's forgotten." "No, let me finish." He turned to face her. I've been alone 2 years. Convinced myself I preferred it that way. Then you arrived, with your fierce independence and your perfect stitches, and suddenly I'm looking for excuses to come to town. Clara's hand stilled on the fabric she held. Read. I know it's too soon. I know you came here to build your own life, not to become part of someone else's. He took a step closer. But I need you to know that my intentions, what I feel, it's honorable, respectful. The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder instantaneous and deafening. Clara cried out involuntarily, and suddenly Reed was there, his hands gentle on her shoulders. It's all right, he murmured. Just noise and light. She should step away, should maintain the proper distance that society demanded. Instead, she found herself leaning into his solid presence. Just for a moment. I never liked storms, she admitted against his shoulder. Even as a child, too much power, too much we can't control. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. Can't control the storm, he agreed. But we can weather it together. The word hung between them, laden with possibility. Clara made herself step back, though every instinct wanted to stay in the circle of his arms. I should go help May, she said unsteadily. Reed's hand dropped to his side. Clara. Her name was a question and a promise all at once. She paused at the door. What you feel, it's not unwelcome, but I need time, need to know I can stand on my own before I think about standing with someone else. I understand, and she could see that he did. Take all the time you need. Downstairs, May took one look at Clara's face and wisely said nothing. They prepared for bed while the storm continued its assault on Hawks Hollow. Clara lay on a pallet beside May's bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the man in her room, in her bed. He's a good man, May said into the darkness. Best I know, truth be told. I know. But you're smart to take it slow. Make sure you're choosing because you want to, not because you need to. Clara thought about those moments in the kitchen, the way Reed had accepted her need for independence even while offering partnership. What if I want both to stand alone and with someone? May's chuckle was warm in the darkness. Then you'd better hope you found a man wise enough to understand the difference. Seems to me you might have. The storm raged on, but inside the bakery, all was quiet. Clara closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future where storms were weathered together, where independence and partnership could exist in the same space, where a woman could be both seamstress and beloved, complete in herself, yet part of something larger. When morning came, bringing weak sunlight and the sound of the town assessing damage, Clara climbed the stairs to find Reed already awake, the bed neatly made, her sewing untouched on the table. Thank you, he said simply, for the shelter. Thank you, she replied, for understanding. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagination. When you're ready, he said, I'll be here. Then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of cedar and rain. Clara stood in her small room, feeling the shape of possibility, the weight of choice. From the window, she watched him mount his horse and ride away, back straight despite the long night. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. And in her chest, something that had been tightly furled began, cautiously, to unfold. Not love, not yet, but the willingness to believe it might be possible. She picked up her needle and began to work, each stitch a small act of faith, a tiny promise to the future. Outside, Hawks Hollow came alive with the sound of hammers and voices, everyone working to repair what the storm had damaged. Clara smiled and kept sewing. She had her own repairs to make, her own future to stitch together. But for the first time since arriving in this dust-blown town, she didn't feel like she was working alone. The sun climbed higher, drying the puddles, warming the air. And in the quiet room above the bakery, Clara's needle flashed in and out, steady as a heartbeat, sure as hope itself. The whispers started as a trickle and grew to a flood. By the week's end, everyone in Hawks Hollow knew that Reed Calderon had spent the night of the storm at May's bakery, and speculation ran wild about exactly where he'd slept. Clara kept her head high and her hands busy, but she felt the weight of every glance, heard the sudden silences when she entered the general store. "Let them talk," May advised, kneading bread with particular vigor. "They'd gossip if you sprouted wings and flew to Sunday service." But the talk took on a sharper edge when Deputy Conroy began making his rounds. He'd visit the shops, lean against counters, and drop poisonous hints with practiced ease. "Mighty convenient, that storm," he'd say, examining his fingernails. "Almost like it was planned. Man wants to spend the night with a woman. Weather provides a fine excuse." Clara heard about these visits from Alice Pruitt, who stopped by one afternoon looking troubled. "He's building a case," Alice warned. "Not a legal one, but a social one, trying to turn the town against you." "And against Reed?" Clara asked, though she knew the answer. "Reed's established here. His family helped found this town, but you—" Alice hesitated. "You're still an outsider, still proving yourself." That evening, Clara delivered a mended dress to Mrs. Morrison and found herself facing a cold reception. The woman who'd praised her work just days before barely looked at her, shoving payment across the threshold like Clara carried some contagion. "I'll not be needing any more work done." "Mrs. Morrison said stiffly, "My husband feels it's inappropriate to associate with certain types." Clara walked home with burning cheeks and a heavy heart. She'd worked so hard to build her reputation, stitch by careful stitch. Now Conroy was unraveling it with nothing more than suggestions and sly smiles. Reed must have heard the rumors too, because he stayed away from town for several days. When he finally appeared at the bakery, it was near closing time, and his face was set in hard lines. "I need to speak with you," he said to Clara, privately. May looked between them and nodded. "I'll be in the kitchen, making noise." When they were alone, Reed paced the small shop like a caged mountain cat. "This is my fault. I should have ridden home in the storm." "And gotten yourself killed. That would have helped my reputation immensely." He stopped pacing to stare at her. "You can joke about this. I can be angry about it. I can let it destroy everything I've built. Or I can keep working and prove them wrong." Clara set down her sewing. "What I won't do is let Wade Conroy dictate my life." "He's doing more than dictating. He's poisoning the well." Reed's hands clenched into fists. "I've half a mind to call him out." "Don't you dare." The thought of Reed facing Conroy over pistols made Clara's blood run cold. "That's what he wants. You defending my honor with violence would only confirm his lies." "Then what? We just let him spread his poison." Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. "No, we give them something else to see, the truth." "Which is?" "That I'm a respectable woman building a business, that you're a rancher who needs winter clothes made, that we conduct ourselves properly and professionally." Reed's laugh was bitter. "Is that all we are, professional acquaintances?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "In public, yes, that's all we can be right now." "And in private?" The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Clara thought of that moment during the storm, the safety of his arms, the promise of something more. "In private," she said softly, "we're two people who understand loss and loneliness, who might, given time and space, find something worth building together." Reed moved closer, careful not to touch her, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm not a patient man by nature." "Then considerate practice." That startled a real smile from him. "You're unlike anyone I've ever known. Clara Whitfield." "Good. I'd hate to be ordinary." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the window, Clara could see a crowd gathering near the saloon. Shouts carried on the evening air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Reed was out the door before Clara could stop him. She and May followed, joining the crowd that had formed a circle around two men fighting in the dust. One was a ranch hand Clara didn't recognize. The other was Wade Conroy. "Say it again," Conroy shouted, landing a blow to the other man's ribs. "Say what you said about respectable women." The ranch hand, one of Reed's men, Clara realized, spat blood and struggled to his feet. "Just said maybe you should mind your own business instead of spreading lies about decent folk." Conroy's response was another punch that sent the smaller man sprawling. The crowd murmured uneasily, but no one intervened. Conroy was the law, after all, such as it was. "That's enough." Reed's voice cut through the noise like a blade. He stepped into the circle, helping his ranch hand stand. "Jake, get to Doc Palmer." "He insulted my authority." Conroy sneered, wiping blood from his knuckles. "Man needs to learn respect. Respect is earned, not beaten into people." Reed replied evenly. "And Jake works for me. You have a complaint, you bring it to me." "Oh, I've got complaints." Conroy's eyes found Clara in the crowd. "About the kind of people you're associating with. The kind of example you're setting." Reed went very still. Clara had seen that stillness in barn cats before they pounced. "Choose your next words carefully, deputy." "Or what you'll defend her honor." Conroy laughed, ugly and knowing. "Bit late for that. Isn't it after your cozy night at the bakery?" The crowd held its collective breath. Clara felt May's hand grip her arm, holding her back, though every instinct screamed to intervene. Reed's voice, when it came, was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "Deputy Conroy, you're drunk on your own importance. You've confused a badge with a crown, and authority with wisdom, but mostly, you've made the mistake of thinking that because a woman stands alone, she stands unprotected." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying clearly. "Miss Whitfield came to our town seeking honest work and a fresh start. She's built a business with skill and determination. She's mended your clothes, helped your children, improved our community, and this is how we repay her with whispers and lies." Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Clara saw Mrs. Harrison near the front, her expression thoughtful. "As for the night of the storm," Reed continued, "I sheltered at May's bakery because the alternative was riding home in lightning. May can attest to the arrangements. Anyone who chooses to see impropriety in basic human kindness and safety says more about themselves than about us." He looked back at Conroy. "You want to come after me, fine. I've got broad shoulders. But you leave Miss Whitfield out of your petty games, or we'll settle this properly." "That a threat, Calderon?" "It's a promise." The two men faced each other while the crowd watched, tension crackling like heat lightning. Then Sheriff Morrison Ben's older brother and a man who'd mostly let Conroy run loose pushed through the crowd. "That's enough excitement for one evening," he said mildly, though his eyes were sharp. "Wade, go sleep it off. Reed, see to your man. Everyone else, find somewhere else to be." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Clara noticed several women glancing her way with something that might have been sympathy or at least reconsideration. Reed approached her and May. "I apologize for the spectacle." "Don't," Clara said firmly. "Thank you for what you said." "Meant every word." He touched his hat. "But I've likely made things worse. Conroy won't forget this." After he left to check on Jake, May and Clara returned to the bakery. They worked in silence, cleaning up for the night, until May finally spoke. "That took courage. What Reed did, putting his reputation on the line for yours." "I didn't ask him to." "No, that's what makes it matter." May studied her. "Question is, what happens now?" Clara considered as she banked the ovens. "Now I prove him right. I work harder, hold my head higher, show this town that I'm exactly who he said I am." "And Conroy?" "Conroy is a bully and a coward. Eventually, bullies overreach." Clara met May's eyes. "I've survived worse than Wade Conroy. He just doesn't know it yet." But that night, as Clara lay in her narrow bed, she admitted to herself that the deputy's campaign was taking its toll. Orders had slowed. Some women crossed the street to avoid her, and while Reed's public defense had been stirring, it had also confirmed in many minds that there was something between them worth defending. She thought about leaving. It would be easier to start over somewhere else, somewhere her past was unknown and her future unmarked by scandal. But then she pictured May's lined face, Alice's quiet friendship, Reed's steady presence. She'd built something here, roots that went deeper than gossip. No, Clara decided, she wouldn't run. Not from Wade Conroy, not from wagging tongues, not even from the growing feelings she had for a grieving rancher who saw her truly. She'd stand her ground, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. The moon rose full and bright, casting shadows through her window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled lonely sound in the vast Texas night. But Clara no longer felt alone. She had allies now, friends who'd stand for her as she'd stand for herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, new tests of her resolve, but tonight, she allowed herself to remember Reed's voice ringing across the crowd, defending her honor not because she needed it, but because she deserved it. She picked up the shirt she'd been mending one of Reed's, torn at the shoulder and by moonlight, began to sew. Each stitch was a small act of defiance, a tiny declaration of permanence. She would not be moved, she would not be broken. And if Wade Conroy thought otherwise, he was about to learn what Clara had known since the night she'd arrived in Hawks Hollow. Sometimes the strongest people were those who'd already survived their worst day and chosen to face the dawn anyway. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon when the autumn sun hung low and golden in the sky. Clara was at the general store, purchasing thread, when young Timothy Patterson burst through the door again, but this time, his face was white with genuine terror. "Fire at the Calderon place. The barn collapsed. Men are trapped." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She dropped the thread and ran, hiking up her skirts as she raced toward the edge of town, where smoke rose black against the sky. Others followed, men abandoning their drinks at the saloon, women emerging from shops, even Doc Palmer huffing along with his medical bag. By the time they reached the Double C, the scene was chaos. What remained of the barn lay in twisted heaps of burning timber. Ranch hands formed a bucket brigade. But the real horror was the section that had caved in completely, trapping men beneath. "Reed," Tom's voice cracked with desperation. "He went in for the Foals. The whole thing came down." Clara's world narrowed to that pile of smoking debris. Without thinking, she joined the men pulling at boards, her hands immediately singed by hot wood. Someone tried to pull her back, Conroy. She realized dimly, but she wrenched free. "That's where he went in." Jake pointed with a bandaged hand. "Near the back stalls." The men worked frantically, but the debris was heavy, tangled. Then Clara heard it, a sound that made her heart leap. Coughing, weak but definite. "There," she pointed to where smoke seeped between fallen beams. "He's there." It took 6 men to lift the main beam. When they finally created an opening, Clara could see Reed pinned beneath, his face bloody, one arm bent at an unnatural angle, but alive, blessedly alive. And beneath him, protected by his body, 2 foals huddled terrified but unharmed. "Get the horses first," Reed gasped. "There," his words cut off in a groan of pain. It took another agonizing 20 minutes to extract him. Clara held back, knowing she'd only be in the way. But when they finally pulled Reed free and laid him on the ground, she was there, kneeling beside him before anyone could stop her. "Don't move," Doc Palmer ordered, examining Reed quickly. "Broken ribs for certain. That arm's fractured, and you've got a nasty blow to the head." Reed's eyes found Clara's face. "The foals." "Safe," she assured him. "Because of you." He tried to smile, then winced. Worth it then.
You fool,
Clara whispered, not caring who heard.
you beautiful, noble fool.
Doc Palmer directed the men to fashion a stretcher. He needs proper care. Someone will have to.
I'll do it,
Clara said firmly. Miss Whitfield, that's not, Doc began. I'll help, May interrupted, appearing at Clara's shoulder. Between the two of us, we can manage, unless you've got a better suggestion. Doc. The doctor looked around at the assembled crowd, rough ranch hands, townspeople drawn by disaster, Deputy Conroy watching with calculating eyes. No, he admitted, but he'll need round-the-clock care. Those ribs could puncture a lung if he moves wrong. They transported Reed to the ranch house, to the same bed where Sarah had died of fever 2 winters past. Clara tried not to think about that as she and May settled in for what would be a long vigil. Reed drifted in and out of consciousness, burning with fever as his body fought the trauma. Clara bathed his face with cool cloths, held water to his lips, kept watch while May prepared broths and medicines. Don't go, Reed muttered in his delirium, fingers clutching weakly at air. Promise me.
I'm here,
Clara soothed, taking his hand.
I'm not going anywhere.
On the second night, his fever spiked dangerously. Doc Palmer came and went, shaking his head grimly. It's in God's hands now, the head injury, the broken ribs, his body's fighting hard, but… Clara refused to accept that. She'd lost too much already, her mother, her fiancé's love, her first chance at a new life. She would not lose Reed, too, not when she'd just begun to understand what he might mean to her. She talked to him through the long dark hours, telling him about her childhood, her dreams, the life she'd thought she'd have and the one she was building instead. She told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the first dress she'd made entirely alone, about the pride in creating something beautiful from mere cloth and thread. You have to get better, she whispered as dawn approached. You have to wake up and argue with me about independence. You have to let me make that winter coat. You have to… Her voice broke. She pressed his hand to her cheek, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work, the strength that had protected 2 innocent creatures at nearly the cost of his own life. You have to give us a chance, she finished.
Please, Reed, fight.
Whether he heard her or whether it was simply time, his fever broke that morning. His breathing eased, and when he finally opened his eyes, those winter sky blue eyes, they were clear and focused.
Clara,
his voice was hoarse, confused.
What? Why are you…
Hush! She helped him sip water.
You've been hurt. The barn fire? You saved the foals.
Memory returned slowly. Reed tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in his ribs, and fell back.
How long? 3 days.
Clara smoothed his hair back from his forehead.
You've had us all worried.
Us, he looked around, seeming to truly see her for the first time. You've been here 3 days. May and I have been taking turns. Someone had to keep you from doing something foolish.
Well, more foolish.
A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. Your reputation
can go hang,
Clara said firmly.
What matters is you're alive.
He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion, the worry, the relief.
You look terrible.
Charming, as always. But Clara smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. Over the following week, Reed improved steadily. His ribs would take time to heal, and his arm was splinted, but the danger had passed. Clara continued to help with his care, though now with May and Tom's wife taking official shifts to satisfy propriety. The town's reaction was mixed. Some saw Clara's devotion as proof of loose morals. Others, particularly those who'd witnessed the rescue and its aftermath, began to see her differently. A woman who'd run toward danger, who'd worked alongside men to save a life, who'd nursed an injured man with skill and dedication. Perhaps such a woman deserved respect rather than whispers. Even Mrs. Harrison paid a visit, bringing a basket of preserves and staying to chat with Clara about the upcoming church bazaar.
My dear,
she said quietly as she left. True character shows in crisis. Yours has been noted. Wade Conroy, predictably, saw things differently. He made a point of visiting during one of Clara's shifts, standing in the bedroom doorway with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Mighty cozy arrangement, he observed. Almost like you planned it. Yes, Clara said dryly, not looking up from the mending in her lap. Reed clearly arranged to have a barn collapse on him just so I could damage my reputation further. Your detective skills are remarkable. Deputy. Conroy's face darkened. Watch your tongue, woman. Invalid or not. Calderon can't protect you forever. I don't need protection, Clara replied calmly. I need you to leave. You're disturbing the patient. From the bed, Reed's voice carried surprising strength. You heard the lady. Conroy, get out of my house. The deputy left, but his parting look promised trouble. Clara and Reed sat in silence for a moment after his departure. He won't forget this, Reed said finally. Neither will I. Clara met his eyes. You almost died. Reed, protecting two animals that most men would have written off as losses. They were young, scared, didn't ask for a fire. He shifted carefully, wincing. Sometimes protecting the vulnerable is worth the risk. And sometimes the cost is too high. Clara's hands had stilled on her sewing. I thought, when I saw you under that beam... Hey. His good hand found hers. I'm here, battered but breathing. This time... She turned her hand to interlace their fingers. Reed, I can't... I've lost people before. I don't think I could bear... You won't have to, he squeezed gently. I promise, no more heroics. Liar, Clara said softly. You'd do the same thing tomorrow if needed. Maybe, but now I'd have more reason to be careful. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Clara, when I was trapped, when I thought the only regret I had was not telling you how I feel, not having more time. Clara's heart raced. Reed! I know you need time. I know you're building your own life, but almost dying clarifies things. He looked at her with those steady blue eyes. I love you, Clara Whitfield. Not because you need me, but because you don't. Because you're strong enough to stand alone, but choose to stand beside me anyway. The words hung in the air like a blessing. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not from sorrow, but from a joy so sharp it was almost painful. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I fought it. But somewhere between that first night and now, you became essential to me. Reed tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer. Then maybe it's time we stopped fighting what everyone already sees. And what's that? That we belong together, that this thing between us is worth building on. Clara leaned down, careful of his injuries, and kissed him softly. It was a promise and a beginning, a seal on words spoken and futures imagined. When she pulled back, Reed was smiling despite the pain it must have caused his bruised face. So, what happens now? Now, Clara said firmly. You heal, properly. No rushing, no pushing yourself too hard. Then we court properly, scandal or no scandal. And then, she smiled, feeling the future spread before them like fabric waiting to be shaped. Then we build something together, stitch by stitch, day by day, something strong enough to weather any storm. I like the sound of that, Reed murmured, already drowsing from the conversation's exertion. Clara sat beside him as he slept, her needle taking up its familiar rhythm. Outside, she could hear the ranch returning to normal, men calling to each other, horses neighing, the eternal wind across the Texas plains. She'd come to Hawks Hollow broken and desperate, but here, in this room where death had once visited and life had triumphed, she felt whole. The threads of her life, the loss, the struggle, the small victories had woven themselves into something beautiful and strong. Tomorrow there would be challenges. Conroy wouldn't give up easily. The town would talk. The work of building a life together would be hard, sometimes painful. But today, with Reed's hand warm in hers and her future finally clear, Clara allowed herself to simply be grateful. For life, for love, for the strange turnings that had brought her to this place, this moment, this man who saw her truly and loved her, not despite her strength but because of it. The sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden, and Clara sewed on. Each stitch a small act of faith, a tiny promise that some things, once broken, could indeed be made whole again. The decision to stay came easier than Clara had expected. As Reed slowly healed, she divided her time between the ranch and town, maintaining her business while helping oversee his recovery. The arrangement raised eyebrows, but something had shifted in Hawks Hollow's perception of her. The woman who'd run toward a burning barn, who'd worked tirelessly to save a life she'd earned a grudging respect that even Conroy's poisonous whispers couldn't entirely erode. "You're different," May observed one morning as Clara prepared for another trip to the Double C. "Settled, like you finally stopped looking over your shoulder for the next disaster." Clara considered this as she packed medical supplies and the shirts she'd finished mending. "I suppose I have, for the first time since arriving here. I know where I belong." "And where's that?" "Here, building something worth keeping." Clara smiled softly. "With Reed, yes, but also for myself. My work, my friendships, my place in this town, they're all part of it." May's weathered face creased with approval. "About time you figured that out. Now get going before that man of yours tries to saddle a horse with one good arm." The ride to the ranch had become familiar. Each landmark a small welcome, the twisted mesquite that marked the halfway point, the rise that revealed the ranch spread below, the sound of cattle and working men that meant home. Not her home, not yet, but someday perhaps. She found Reed on the porch, fully dressed for the first time since the accident, trying to button his shirt one-handed. His splinted arm made the task nearly impossible. "You're supposed to be resting," Clara scolded, setting down her bags. "I've rested for 2 weeks. Any more and I'll grow roots." He gave her a frustrated look. "Can't even dress myself properly." "Here." Clara stepped close, her fingers taking over the buttons. She tried not to notice the way his breath caught, the warmth radiating from him. "Doc Palmer said 6 weeks minimum for those ribs." "Doc Palmer's overcautious." "Doc Palmer kept you alive." She finished the last button and stepped back, though part of her wanted to linger. "Besides, Tom's managing fine as foreman. The ranch won't fall apart without you." "It's not about the ranch." Reed caught her hand before she could move away fully. "It's about feeling useless, helpless." Clara understood. She'd felt the same those first nights in Hawks Hollow, dependent on strangers' charity. "Your healing, that's not useless, it's necessary." "Speaking of necessary," Reed's expression grew serious. "We need to talk about Conroy." Clara's stomach tightened. "What's he done now?" "He paid me a visit yesterday, made some suggestions about proper compensation for services rendered during my recovery." Reed's jaw clenched. The implications were unpleasant. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "That man has a mind like a sewer." "He also has influence. He's been talking to the town council, suggesting they need regulations about unmarried women operating businesses. Says it's about maintaining moral standards." Clara sank into the porch chair beside him. "He's trying to force me out. Or force you into a position where you need protection. His protection, specifically." Reed's good hand clenched into a fist. "Tom overheard him at the saloon, boasting about how he'll have you begging for his help before winter's out." "I'd sooner beg from rattlesnakes." "I know, but he's not going to stop. Clara, if anything, he's escalating." They sat in silence, watching the distant figures of ranch hands moving cattle. Finally, Clara spoke. "May warned me this would happen. that some men can't bear women who won't bow to them. She straightened her spine. But I won't be driven out, not by him. You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone.
I'm not alone.
Clara looked at him.
I have May, Alice, even Mrs. Harrison now, and I have you.
You do, always. Reed shifted to face her more fully, wincing slightly. Clara, I know you value your independence. I know you need to stand on your own feet. But would it be so terrible to stand together publicly? Clara's heart skipped. Reed, I'm not asking you to give up anything. Your work, your friendships, your own earnings, all of that remains yours. But as my wife, you'd have legal protection. Social standing Conroy couldn't challenge. He paused. And I'd have you, which is all I really want anyway. The proposal, practical yet heartfelt, was so perfectly Reed that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're suggesting marriage as a business arrangement. I'm suggesting marriage because I love you. The protection it offers is just additional benefit. He reached out, cupping her cheek with his good hand. But only if you're ready. Only if it's what you want too. Clara leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work, the gentleness that belied his strength. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the gossips who'd claimed she'd trapped him, the independence she'd fought so hard to build, the fear of trusting another man with her future. Then she thought of all the reasons to say yes, the way he'd defended her publicly, his patience with her need for autonomy, the quiet mornings sharing coffee and conversation, the way he saw her not as someone to be saved or controlled, but as a partner, an equal. I won't give up my sewing, she said finally. I'd be disappointed if you did. And I'll keep my earnings, save what I contribute to household expenses. Fair enough.
And if we have children,
Clara flushed but pressed on.
They'll learn both ranching and sewing, boy or girl.
Reed smiled. I'd expect nothing less. Clara took a deep breath.
Then yes, I'll marry you.
Reed Calderon, not for protection, not for position, but because I can't imagine building a life without you in it. His kiss was careful, mindful of healing ribs, but it held promise of passion carefully banked. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. When? Reed asked. As soon as you can stand through a ceremony without swaying. Clara smiled. I won't have people saying I married an invalid for his money. Heaven forbid. Reed laughed, then winced. All right, 2 more weeks. Then we make it official. The news spread through Hawks Hollow like wildfire. By the time Clara returned to town that evening, May was already planning the wedding cake. About time, was her only comment, but her embrace was warm and strong. The reactions varied. Alice Pruitt offered genuine congratulations. Mrs. Harrison declared it a sensible match with approval. The ranch hands, according to Tom, were planning a celebration that would shake the rafters. But Wade Conroy's reaction was volcanic. Clara was working in her room above the bakery when she heard him shouting in the street below. She went to the window to see him gesticulating wildly, clearly drunk despite the early hour. Thinks she's too good for honest men, he bellowed to anyone who'd listen. Spreads her legs for a rich rancher, but acts proper with the rest of us. Clara's hands clenched on the windowsill. She started to turn away, but then she saw Reed riding into town, Tom and Jake flanking him despite his injuries. Word had reached the ranch, apparently. Reed dismounted carefully, his movements still stiff. Conroy, you've got something to say about my fiancé. Conroy swayed but stood his ground. Fiancé, that what we're calling it now. That's what we're calling it. What we're not calling it is any of the filth spewing from your mouth. Reed stepped closer. I've tolerated your harassment because Clara asked me to, but that ends now. You threatening me, Calderon. I'm informing you. One more word against Clara, one whisper, one suggestion, one sideways look, and we'll settle this permanently. Your ribs aren't even healed. You couldn't fight a newborn calf. Reed smiled coldly. Try me. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Sheriff Morrison appeared, looking more authoritative than Clara had ever seen him. Wade, you're drunk and disorderly. That's a night in jail to cool off. He looked at Reed. And you need to go home before those ribs puncture something. Not until he understands. He understands. Morrison's voice was firm. Don't you, Wade, you understand that Miss Whitfield is a respectable woman engaged to a respectable man, and this harassment stops now. Conroy spat in the dust but allowed himself to be led away. As he passed Reed, he muttered something too low for Clara to hear, but she saw Reed's face darken. Later, when Reed came to the bakery, Clara confronted him. What did he say? Nothing worth repeating. Reed, he sighed. He said this wasn't over, that accidents happen on ranches all the time. His good hand found hers. Empty threats from a bitter man. Maybe, but promise me you'll be careful. I promise, and I'll make sure the hands know to watch for trouble. He studied her face, having second thoughts. About marrying you, no? Clara squeezed his hand. About staying in a town where men like Conroy have power sometimes. He won't have power forever. His kind never does. Reed pulled her closer. Besides, this is our home. We've bled for it, fought for it. I won't let him drive us away. Us, Clara repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Get used to it. In 2 weeks, it'll be official. As Reed left, Clara returned to her sewing with renewed purpose. Each stitch now was building towards something larger, not just a business or a reputation, but a life shared, a future claimed despite those who'd try to deny it. Outside, Hawks Hollow went about its evening routines, but Clara knew something had shifted. Lines had been drawn, sides had been chosen, and for better or worse, she'd cast her lot not just with Reed, but with this place, these people. This life she'd built from nothing but thread and determination. The battle with Conroy wasn't over, might never be truly over, but Clara had survived worse storms, and now she wouldn't weather them alone. She held up the shirt she'd been mending, one of Reed's, torn in the accident, but now whole again, stronger at the seams than it had been before. It seemed fitting. Somehow, a metaphor for all of them broken but mended, scarred but sturdy, ready to face whatever came next. 2 weeks, then she'd be Clara Calderon, rancher's wife, seamstress, citizen of Hawks Hollow by choice rather than chance. The girl who'd arrived in tears would become a woman who'd earned her place through skill and courage and stubborn refusal to break. Clara smiled and set another stitch. Outside, the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of promise, and in the room above the bakery, a woman sewed her future one careful stitch at a time, weaving strength from thread and hope from the simple act of refusing to quit. The winter fair arrived with December's first snow, transforming Hawks Hollow into something almost magical. Booths lined Main Street, selling everything from hand-carved toys to fresh preserves. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and for once, the town's usual tensions seemed suspended in favor of seasonal goodwill. Clara appeared at the fair in the dress she'd made herself deep burgundy wool that brought out the warm tones in her skin, with careful pleating that showcased her skill. It had taken weeks of evening work, but the result was worth it. She looked like what she'd become, a woman of substance, talent, and quiet pride. You clean up nice, May said approvingly, linking arms with her, though I prefer you covered in flour. I'll be back to that soon enough, Clara smiled. But today, I wanted to look like the future Mrs. Calderon. Like myself, just the best version. They made their way through the crowd, Clara aware of the looks she drew, some admiring, some envious, a few still suspicious, but most were simply curious about the woman who'd transformed from desperate stranger to respected seamstress to Reed Calderon's bride-to-be. The wedding had been small, but perfect, held in the church just 2 weeks after Reed's proposal. He'd stood straight despite his healing ribs, his eyes never leaving Clara's face as she walked down the aisle in a simple ivory dress of her own making. When he'd slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, whispering promises meant only for her ears, Clara had felt something settle deep in her chest, a certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Now, as Mrs. Reed Calderon, she moved through the fair with new confidence. Her sewing business continued to thrive from the small workshop Reed had set up for her at the ranch. Orders came steadily, and she'd even taken on an apprentice, young Sally Morrison, the sheriff's daughter, who showed real talent with a needle. Mrs. Calderon. Abigail Harrison's voice rang out. Perfect timing. The quilting circle has a booth. We're raising funds for new school supplies. Your contributions have been our best sellers. Clara had donated several pieces to the cause: intricately embroidered pillowcases, a child's dress with delicate smocking, a man's shirt so finely made it could have graced a governor's back. They'd sold within hours of the fair's opening.
I'm glad they're doing well,
Clara said warmly. Education matters. Indeed it does, Mrs. Harrison leaned closer, lowering her voice. I must tell you, my dear, the transformation you've achieved is remarkable. When you first arrived, she trailed off delicately. When I first arrived, I was desperate and alone. Clara finished calmly. I don't hide from that, Mrs. Harrison. It's part of my story. Yes, well, the older woman seemed taken aback by Clara's directness. Not many would have survived it with such grace. As they talked, Clara noticed a commotion near the dance platform. Deputy Conroy stood at the edge, swaying slightly, a bottle poorly concealed in his coat pocket. He'd been quieter since the sheriff's warning, but the look he gave Clara across the crowd was pure venom. Ignore him, May advised. Man's been drinking his meals since Reed put him in his place. But ignoring became impossible when the fiddle music started and couples began to dance. Reed appeared at Clara's elbow, still moving carefully but with most of his strength returned.
May I have this dance, Mrs. Calderon?
Your ribs are well enough for one slow dance with my wife. He offered his hand with that smile that still made her heart skip. Unless you're afraid of causing more gossip.
When have I ever been afraid of that?
They moved onto the platform, Reed's hand warm on her waist, and Clara felt the crowd's attention like a physical weight. But as they began to move to the music, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the man who'd seen her worth when she'd had nothing, and the woman who'd chosen to build a life with him despite all obstacles. You're beautiful, Reed murmured. Have I told you that today? Only 3 times. Shameful neglect. I'll do better. They were laughing when Conroy's slurred voice cut through the music. Look at that, the whore and her keeper, dancing pretty as you please. The music stuttered to a stop. Dancers stepped back, creating a circle around Conroy as he stumbled onto the platform. Wade? Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd. Not today. It's Christmas fair. Christmas fair, Conroy mocked. Where we all pretend she's respectable now, where we forget what she really is. Reed started forward, but Clara's hand on his arm stopped him. She stepped away from her husband, facing Conroy with the same calm she'd used to thread a needle in a storm. What I really am, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent crowd, is a woman who came to this town with nothing but skill and determination. What I am is someone who built a business through honest work, who earned respect through service to this community. She moved closer to Conroy, close enough to smell the whiskey on him. What I am is a wife, a friend, a neighbor, and a citizen of Hawks Hollow. But what I am not, what I have never been, is afraid of small men who try to make themselves tall by stepping on others. Conroy's face contorted. You think you're better than me? Some Eastern cast-off who— I think, Clara interrupted, that character is shown in how we treat others, Mine has been on display every day in every stitch, every kindness, every moment I chose to stay and fight rather than run. She looked around the crowd, meeting eyes. As has yours, Deputy. The question is, which example does Hawks Hollow want to follow? The silence stretched taut. Then Alice Pruitt began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by others May, the Morrisons, Mrs. Harrison, ranch hands, shopkeepers, even some who'd whispered against Clara in the past. The applause grew until it filled the square, a judgment rendered not by law but by community. Conroy's hand moved toward his gun, more reflex than threat, but Reed was there instantly, his own hand stopping Conroy's wrist. "Draw that gun and it's the last mistake you make," Reed said quietly. "Badge or no badge." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Wade Conroy, you're relieved of duty. Gun and badge. Now!" "You can't." "I can and I am. Should have done it months ago." Morrison's weathered face was grim. "This town needs law that protects all its citizens, not just the ones you approve of." Conroy looked around wildly, seeking support, but found only turned-backs and hard faces. With shaking hands, he unpinned his badge, letting it fall to the platform with a small clatter. "This isn't over," he snarled at Clara. "Yes," she said firmly. "It is." He stumbled away, pushing roughly through the crowd that parted to let him pass. Within minutes, he'd vanished into the gathering dusk, leaving only the echo of his bitterness behind. The fiddle player, with admirable presence of mind, struck up a lively tune. "Let's have some dancing," he called. "It's Christmas fair." Slowly, the festival atmosphere returned. Couples resumed dancing, children ran between the booths, and life flowed back into its normal channels. But something had changed. Clara felt it in the nods of respect, the genuine smiles, the way women who'd once crossed streets to avoid her now approached with warmth. "That was—" Reed pulled her close, mindful of the crowd but needing the contact. "You were magnificent." "I was tired," Clara corrected. "Tired of hiding, of apologizing for existing, of letting him make me small." She looked up at him. "You gave me the courage to stand tall." "No," Reed touched her face gently. "You always had that courage. I just reminded you of it." They danced again, properly this time, while snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes. Around them, Hawks Hollow celebrated imperfect and sometimes cruel, but capable of growth, of choosing justice over prejudice when pushed to decide. "Do you remember," Reed said as they swayed together, "that first night you were crying behind the livery stable? And you watched over me without saying a word?" Clara smiled. "I thought I was alone." "You were never alone, not from that moment on." He spun her gently, bringing her back close. "I think I started falling in love with you right then, this fierce, broken woman who still had strength to face the morning. And I fell in love with a man who let me cry without trying to fix it, who offered protection without demanding payment." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "We've come far from that night." "Further still to go," Reed agreed. "But together," as the fair wound down and families headed home. Clara and Reed walked through the snow-dusted streets. Her sewing basket sat in their wagon beside supplies for the ranch, a perfect metaphor for the life they were building, practical and beautiful in equal measure. "You know Conroy was wrong," Reed said suddenly, "about you being too much. The truth is, you were never too much. You were just waiting for a place that could hold all of you." Clara stopped walking, snow catching in her hair, and kissed her husband there in the middle of Main Street, not caring who saw, because he was right. She'd found her place not just in Reed's arms, but in this town, this life she'd stitched together from scraps of courage and threads of hope. When they finally reached the wagon, Reed helped her up, then paused. No regrets about any of it. Clara looked back at Hawks Hollow, The bakery where May had given her shelter. The church where she'd married. The streets she'd walked first in desperation, then determination, and finally in triumph. "No regrets," she said firmly. Every thread led here. Every stitch was necessary. Reed clicked to the horses, and they headed home through the falling snow. Behind them, the lights of the fair twinkled like stars fallen to earth. And ahead, the Double C Ranch waited no longer just Reed's heritage but their future, built on love tested by fire and strengthened by choice. Clara Calderon, née Whitfield, seamstress and survivor, pulled her husband's coat closer around her shoulders and smiled. Tomorrow there would be work clothes to mend, a ranch to help run, a community to continue serving. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd refused to let tears be her ending, who'd chosen to build rather than break, who'd found love not as rescue but as partnership. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the harsh landscape in temporary softness. But beneath, the land remained what it had always been: tough, unforgiving, demanding strength from all who'd claim it. Clara understood that now, understood that she belonged here not despite her struggles, but because of them. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Clara and Reed's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and survival in the Old West, please click the hype button. Your support helps bring these historical romances to listeners around the world. Until next time, partners.